Welcome to the PMdistilled lesson. In this lesson, I'll explain plan, scope, management. Plan scope management is a major component of project management. At the start of the project, we have to, at the start of the project as well as throughout the project, we have to define the scope of the project, baseline it, and maintain it uh, throughout the project. Otherwise, we'll end up not delivering the desired scope or the desired value to the project stakeholders. The first step is organize for scope management. So we have to define who will work on scope definition, what is the process to be followed, what are the tools and templates to be used for this. Very often we'll get the tools and templates from the organizational process assets or the procedures defined within the organization. Then, after organizing for plan scope management, the next step is collecting the. We need a plan for collecting the detailed requirements. For one of the projects where I worked, we had to collect requirements from all the states. That is 24 locations across different states and consolidate it. So that itself involves detailed planning because we have to travel, we have to meet senior stakeholders, conduct interviews, and sometimes brainstorming with their team. So requirements management plan. So that is, we need a plan to manage requirements. And once the requirements are collected, then we consolidate those requirements. And then we get into scope definition. That is the scope definition approach. We may conduct workshops, interviews, prototyping, user stories, etc., to transform the requirements from raw requirements uh, uh, to define scope. We have a traceability matrix here. So when we convert the collected requirements into consolidated requirements and finally the scope, we need to maintain a traceability matrix. Uh, how, which functionality or which part of the scope refers to that particular requirement. We should have absolute uh, transparency or mapping is required that we accomplish through traceability metrics. Which requirement goes into which part of the scope document, and later which part of the scope document goes into the work breakdown structure. So which are the work packages relates to that particular scope component, and that scope component relates to which part of the requirements collected. So this traceability will help us to deliver 100% according to the scope. Next step is scope decomposition strategy. So we have the scope document. Now we have to decompose that scope into the first step is a product breakdown structure. Then we get into a work breakdown structure. A product breakdown structure or PBS just shows the deliverables of the project. We superimpose the product breakdown structure with the actual work that need to be performed, and we arrive at the work breakdown structure. For example, if you have to deliver a software component, component one, which is part of the product breakdown structure. Now, when it comes to work breakdown structure, yes, component one. So if I have to develop that component one, I should do detailed design, design reviews, coding, testing, bug fixing, unit testing, integration testing, maybe system testing. So all these things get superimposed into the on top of the product breakdown structure, and we arrive at the work breakdown structure. We'll be explaining these things in detail as we proceed. Uh, and then comes the scope validation process. Once the product breakdown structure and the work breakdown structures are defined, then now we have to validate it. For that, we use techniques like reviews, uh, uh, acceptance, that is formal acceptance, and the definition of acceptance criteria, etc. Then once the scope is defined, uh, as the project progresses, scope changes will happen, scope enhancement will happen, scope removal will happen. We have to control it. So we have to define the scope control process as well. Who can make a change? Who must approve the change? Who will do the impact analysis, etc., etc. That must be that is done as part of the scope control process. Throughout scope definition and scope management, stakeholder involvement is mandatory. Because if we miss out some of the key stakeholders, or if some of the key stakeholders are totally unaware of what's happening, towards the end of the project, that person is quite likely to come back and say, I did not get what I wanted. So, complete stakeholder involvement in scope definition and scope management is one of the critical success factors of projects. Uh, then we use various tools and techniques for scope definition. The most popular ones are workshops, interviews, prototyping, user stories, brainstorming, benchmarking, etc. Uh, and the output of the whole stuff is the scope management plan. So, plan scope management is the process of creating a structured approach to define, manage, validate, and control project and product scope. As discussed earlier, the product breakdown structure gives us the product scope, and we superimpose the product breakdown structure with the actual work that need to be performed, and we arrive at the project scope. How will the scope be defined? How will the requirements be collected? How will scope changes be handled? The objectives of scope management is prevent scope creep, ensure clarity of deliverables, align with business value and stakeholder expectations, and provide baseline for control. That means once the scope is baseline or a scope document version 1.0 happens, any changes to that will have to follow the change management procedure. The key components of scope planning, we have the scope management plan, requirements management plan, the scope definition approach, scope decomposition strategy, scope control process, stakeholder involvement plan and strategy, and the tools and techniques. And inputs for scope definition are project charter, business case, stakeholder register, enterprise environmental factors, and organizational process assets. Outputs is the scope management plan and the requirements management plan. So here we have given a practical example of a solar power plant. Requirement strategy is there, scope planning is there, control mechanisms, etc. To summarize, scope management plans. Scope management is one of the critical success factors of projects. So we have to plan for scope management, And then we have to plan for requirements management. And then we have to define the scope definition approach. We must define the scope decomposition strategy, how many levels in the WBS we should go, etc. Scope validation processes we need to define. Scope control processes we must define. And everything gets consolidated into the scope management plan. Thank you very much.